Okay, well, great. Let's. So we're going to continue on in our coverage of statistics, and so we are going to talk about storing, I guess, data and how we can store and organize data. Okay. So we'll talk about data types as well, and storing/organizing data. Okay, and so you can think of, as far as data goes, when, again, the big picture in statistics is there's some population that is too big for us to observe directly, and so instead we take out a little piece called our sample, and we observe that, okay? And so this, the data that we talk about generally almost always refers to the data that we see in a sample, okay? So, you know, our data almost always refers to the information found in a sample. And so you will have a bunch of observations. Each observation will appear as a row in our data table. So we will store our data in a data table. Okay. Each observation, okay, and sometimes this is called an observational unit. Is stored in, each observation will have a row, or is a row, in our data table. Okay. Every bit of information that we collect about each observation will be a variable, okay? Okay, and so our table will look something like this. Okay, and so we could imagine saying, you guys, this classroom is the sample, so our example will be our sample is the students in the class. Okay, and we can go around, and so we'll have, you know, a name, and so we'll have, you know, Joe, and we'll collect different pieces of information about each student. So each observational unit gets a row, and so we'll have sex, age, I don't know, height, hair color. Okay, so Joe is male, is 20 years old, is, we'll say, 71 inches tall, and has brown hair, okay? And then another student, we'll say Ashley is female, is 19 years old, is 64 inches tall, and has blonde hair, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, okay? So each column is a variable, each row is an observation. Okay, and so in this classroom, we would anticipate approximately 170 rows or something like that. Okay, so we would have a total of about 170 rows, one for each student. Okay, and so our sample size, which will be the number of rows that we have in our data table, our sample size is denoted by the letter N. All right. So far, so good? Yes. Okay. So we have two types of variables. I mean, we can further divide these into even greater detail, but we'll there's primarily two types of variables that we can gather. Okay. We have numeric variables, which tell us how much or how many. And we have categorical variables, which tell us what type or what kind. Okay, and so on our, if I could just flip back here. Oh, shoot. What is this? So if I flip back to, where's my, hang on. I lost my, I don't know how to select. Okay. What? Shoot. Okay, I don't know how to use my computer anymore. Where did my tool go? Okay, never mind. Is it, oh gosh, this is like the worst. Okay. All right. Okay, so if we just take the kind of the column headings of our data table, we can kind of label which ones are numeric and categorical, right? So numeric, this some people argue that this is an identifier, or we can just call it a categorical variable. Okay. Categorical variable. Some will say this is a special type of categorical variable, which is an identifier. Okay. Sex would be a what kind of variable? Categorical, okay. Age, numeric, okay, telling us how much or how many years you've been alive, okay. Height, also numeric. And hair color will be categorical. Okay, as far as, but variables like age, okay, so age, the way, if we record age in years, that is definitely a numeric variable. So for example, 19 versus 22 and 46. This is okay. However, if you're some organization like Nielsen Research, okay, age can also be recorded as a categorical variable. So, for example, you're in the 18 to 25 demographic versus 26 to 49 and 50 to 65 or something like that. Okay. However they split up the demographic categories, okay, by age. So age can also be recorded as a categorical variable. So you want to definitely pay attention to how things are being recorded, because that's going to make a difference in the type of analyses that you can do later on. Okay. Other things that might appear as numbers may not be numeric variables at all either. Okay. So for example, we can have area code. Okay, so you got like 310 versus 213 and 818, 562, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. These they're numbers, but they don't tell us how much or how many. Okay. It doesn't make sense to say, oh, my friend, he has 600 more area code than I do. Okay. Those kinds of statements don't make sense. All right. So area code, these appear as numbers, but do not tell us how much or how many. So really, they are categorical variables, okay? Okay. And so you have that. All right. As far as organizing our data, okay, so we can talk about summarizing. Categorical data, okay, and we can summarize them with a frequency table, okay. So, for example, let's say we were just going to look at the columns. We'll just look at the categorical variables in our data table. Okay, so we had the data table for all students in the class. Okay, how many rows are in this data table? About how many? Something around 170, right? Now, if you're like most people, you probably don't actually want to have to look at a big table with 170 rows, okay? If somebody, you know, if you're working in an office or something and someone tries to print off an Excel worksheet with 170 rows, it's probably going to be annoying, okay? It'll be like, it'll take up, you know, 10 pages or something. It's not fun, okay? So we can have a summary table. And in specific, the summary table will be called a frequency table. And it gets rid of all of the individual information, and it just says something like, as far as sex goes, we'll have male, female, so, you know, just assuming everybody identified as either male or female, we'll have a frequency here, and then, so we'll say, I don't know, 82. If we have 170 total, this means we've got 88 over here, okay? And so now, pretty much, if this was just the information we need, you know, we no longer need all 170 rows. We can present the same information with just, really just 2 rows, or, you know, 3 rows if you count the total row, okay? So this is a summary table, and this pretty much presents the information that we want, okay? We can also create a column called relative frequency. Okay, and basically all we're going to do is just express the frequency as a percentage, okay? So, you know, what calculation do I need to do to get the percentage here? Okay, this was not a trick question. I would do what? 82 divided by 170? Okay, well, thank you very much, calculator. So 82 divided by 170 would be 0.4823, so we would say this is 48 well, I guess 24 if I round correctly, 24%, okay? Which means the rest has to be, you know, 1 minus that, 0.5176, 51.76%, or, you know, if you don't believe in things adding up, you can do 88 divided by 170 yourself, and you'll get the exact same answer, okay? So, of course, everything adds up to 100%, okay? All right, and so, you know, if you present just the percentages, then it would be called a relative frequency table, okay? So frequency table or relative frequency table. And so this would be a way to summarize our information. Okay, so just a quick check. What kind of variable are we summarizing with this table? Categorical variable, okay? So the data being summarized here is a categorical variable, because even though we've got numbers like 82 and 88 or percentages, the data itself, the underlying data in the table, is a categorical variable. So, so here we are summarizing a categorical variable. Okay. We can also create something called a two-way table. Okay. Two-way table is pretty much just a frequency table, but for 2 categorical variables. Okay, and so in this case, we will have male and female for sex, and then we'll have a hair color or any other thing. Maybe it's probably going to make I'm just going to say left hand dominant or right hand dominant, okay? Just to make it easier for me. Left hand dominant versus right hand dominant. Okay, and so we'll have, again, total row and total columns over here. Okay, so what values can I fill out based on on this one, based on this table over here? Okay, so I can say the number that goes here for the total number of males will be what? 82, and this number is going to be 88, and this number is 170. Okay. The other information we don't have, we would have to go into the actual data table itself and count these things up. Okay. So maybe we'll go through the table and we'll say, okay, how many left-handed males are there? And I'm going to just make up a number. I have no idea. 12. Okay. So if I put 12 here, that means I have to have what? 70 over here, right? Okay, and then let's say I have 14 over here, which means I've got, I don't know, 74, if I can add. Okay, and so we have a total of 26 here and 144. I think I did this correctly. Yes, okay. Okay, so that's great. How does this work? Shoot. I really, oh man, okay, there used to be like this little box selection tool and I don't know where it went. Life is hard. Okay, so we've got this thing and I'll use, dang it. Okay, no, okay. All right, I'm gonna have to just draw a loop around this thing. Okay. All right, so next slide, I just want, yeah. Where's my rectangular selection tool, darn it? Okay, so we can ask questions like, what percentage of males are left-handed? Okay, and you would tell me the fraction, at least the fraction that I need to do would be what? 12 divided by 82, okay? So 12 over 82, 14.6%. Let me just change my setup here. Okay, this will do it. All right, and then we can also ask a similar question, but different. What percent of left-handed people are male? And you would say the fraction that I need to do for this one is 12 over 26. Okay, so our answer here would be 0.462 or 46.2%. Okay. And this is further different from what percent of all students in the class are left-handed and male. Okay, and the answer here would be 12 divided by 170. Okay, and we would get something like 7.1%. Okay, so these are similar sounding, but they're distinct. I think you guys pick up on this quickly enough that I don't need to spend much more time, but if any of this is confusing, please make sure you understand the distinction between each of these three questions, because Although they sound similar, they are distinctly different questions. Okay, are we good on this? Okay, well, cool. Let's talk about gathering data or collecting data then, okay? Okay, and so we've already talked about trying to get something like a simple random sample, okay? Because we're hoping to get a representative sample, a sample that's representative of the population. So that's something that ideally we can do. But you know, once you have a sample of people to study or something like that, there's different things we can do to kind of actually record the data that we have. Okay, so one type of data that exists is anecdotal data. Okay, and these are like stories. Okay, quote unquote stories. So this is, you know, customer testimonials. You know, I had an aunt who, you know, had this sickness, and then she tried this thing out, and then she was cured. I don't want to discredit the facts of any of these stories, okay? We're not saying that these things didn't happen. It's just from a statistical standpoint, we cannot perform an analysis on anecdotal data, okay? So I'm not saying that anecdotal data is useless. It's just from a statistical standpoint, we cannot perform an analysis, okay? Okay, so statisticians generally aren't a huge fan of anecdotal data. Okay, and you know, without properly controlled studies, it's hard to give much weight to kind of conclusions or findings from anecdotal data. Okay. That said, you know, we're not saying that people are making things up. That's not what we're saying at all. We're just saying we can't do anything from a statistical standpoint. Okay? So as far as statistical data that's statistically useful to us, we have observational studies. And we also have experiments. But I'm going to first talk about observational studies first, and then I'll talk about the experiments. Okay, so with observational studies, we observe the subjects in our study. We try not to interfere with these subjects other than taking measurements. Okay, and if possible, we try to record as many bits of information as possible that could be relevant to the thing that we're studying, okay? We try to, if possible, we try to collect as many bits of information as possible that could be related to the, I'm going to just write phenomenon that we are studying. Okay, and at the end of an observational study, we might be able to make a conclusion saying a certain variable is associated with a certain outcome. Okay, so the key word here is associated. We are not going to say that a certain variable causes a certain outcome. Okay, all we can say is that there is an association. Okay, so do not write causes. Okay, let me contrast the observational study to an experiment, but let me just make sure you guys have all this written down for those of you who are taking notes. Okay, we good? Okay, so on the other hand, we have experiments, or perhaps a better description would be controlled experiments. And with controlled experiments, we assign treatments. Okay, treatments would be certain conditions to our subjects. So the people or the things that we're studying, we assign treatments or the conditions to them, and we try to control as many aspects of variation that could have an effect on the outcome. Okay? Ideally, everyone would have the exact same set of conditions. Everyone would have the exact same set of conditions, and with the exception of the variable or treatment of interest. Okay, so for example, let's say you want to know, does a certain medication help reduce high blood pressure? Okay. Now there are lots of things that could go into affecting someone's blood pressure, right? Their diet, the amount of exercise they have, their age, their weight, their gender, ethnicity, the amount of stress they have in their life, their occupation, all sorts of things could affect someone's blood pressure, okay? And so for an experiment, ideally, everyone would have the same, would be identical, okay? And you could give them all, you can make everyone have the same diet, you can make everyone have the same exercise regimen, you could make everyone have the same type of work, and you would pick people in your study so that, they're all of the same gender and type, or body size, and all of this. And then so you would have all these people with the exact same conditions, and you would just split them up into two groups, and you'd say group 1 you get placebo, group 2 you get the actual drug. And of course you don't tell them, because you don't want them to actually know whether they're getting the placebo or the medication. And then you study and see what happens, okay? And if at the end of your study you find that the group that got the actual medication does have lower blood pressure than the group that got placebo, you can say everything about these people were exactly the same, except for the fact that these guys got placebo and these guys got the medication. Therefore, the difference in the blood pressure that we observe can be attributed to the difference between the placebo and medication. Okay? That's how a properly controlled experiment would be done. Now, of course, this quote ideal experiment is probably not practically possible, or maybe not even ethically possible. So, you just kind of have to deal with small changes. But as far as experiments go, ideally we could control everything so that any difference observed at the end of the experiment can be attributed to the difference in the treatments and not anything else. Okay? If you did a bad experimental setup, perhaps group 1 was all women and group 2 was all men, and then you gave group 1 placebo and you gave group 2 the medication. If at the end of your study you find a difference between the blood pressure of group 1 and the blood pressure of group 2, you don't know if that difference is because of the differences in placebo and treatment, or if it's differences because that this group was all women and this group was all men. Okay? So that would be a bad experimental design. Okay, so let me kind of just summarize everything I said there in just a few lines here. Okay? All right, so ideally everyone would have the exact same set of conditions with the exception of the variable or treatment of interest. Okay? At the end of an experiment, differences in outcome can be attributed to the differences in treatment, or differences between treatments, because all other conditions were made identical. Okay? And of course, maybe that's not always possible, but that's the idea that we have. Experiments are not always practically or ethically possible. Okay, so if any of you in the future of your life become pregnant or know someone that becomes pregnant, you will not be allowed to take certain medications. Okay, and the reason for that is not necessarily because the medication is bad, but because there's just no information about the medication. All right. We don't know, we cannot ethically perform experiments and say, please try out this medication and we're going to see if it increases the risk of birth defects or something like that. We can't do that and say, do that. So there's just a lot of information that's not known about the effects of medication during pregnancy. And so this stuff just isn't known, okay? So I guess the big difference would be with observational studies, you can only say association, and with experiments, if properly done, you might be able to say there is a causal relationship, okay? So I guess I'll say our key point with observational studies at best we can say there is an association, okay? And with experiments, assuming the data supports it, we could make a cause and effect conclusion. Okay, so a lot of studies, because their experiments are not possible, all we can say is that there's an association. We can say things like increased levels of stress is associated with an increased risk of heart failure, okay? We can say that, but there's no experiment that's going to say, hey, thanks for volunteering for our experiment. Now we're going to increase the amount of stress in your life, and we're going to see if that increases your risk of heart failure. So just based on studies that have been done, we can say there's an association, but it's not necessarily the case that one causes the other, okay? So there could be other things going on that we don't know about that goes into that. So do the reading for chapter 1 and whatnot. There's a few key terms like I'll just throw them up here, like placebo and confounding variable. I think it's quite straightforward in the reading, okay? Treatment variable, etc. Treatment and response. So these are just some terms that you should know. I think it's straightforward enough in the reading for you to figure this out. Okay, you guys have lab tomorrow, and I'll see you guys on Friday.